Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through Gospel of John, and we have gone through chapter 1 in 3 meetups of about 6 hours, all put together. And now we're moving on to chapter 2. So we're going to have 3 readings of the chapter to start things off. We're going to start with David Norton with King James Version, followed by Dave with New King James, and then Evanique, and we'll go from there. David Norton, could you go ahead and start?
Okey doke. And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, They have no wine. And Jesus saith unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. His mother saith unto the servants, Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. And there were set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Jesus saith unto them, Fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he saith unto them, Draw out now and bear unto the governor of the feast. And they bear it. And when the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom, and saith unto him, Every man at the beginning doeth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse, but thou hast kept the good wine until now. This beginning of the miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, and he and his mother and his brethren and his disciples, and they continued there not many days. And the Jews' Passover was at hand. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple that sold oxen, sheep, and doves, and the changers of money sitting. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables, and said unto them that sold doves, Take these things hence, make not my Father's house a house of merchandise. And his disciples remembered that it was written, The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Then answered the Jews and said to him, What sign showest thou unto us, seeing that thou doest these things? Jesus answered and said to them, Destroy the temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was the temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. When therefore he was risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this unto them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover, in the feast day, many believed in his name. When they saw the miracles which he did, many believed in his name when they saw the miracles which he did. But Jesus did not commit himself unto them, because he knew all men, and needed not that any should testify of man, for he knew what was in man.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Evanique. Evanique, go ahead.
Sorry. So this is the wedding. This is New Living Translation. The wedding at Cana. The next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, that's not our problem," Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." But his mother told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, "Fill the jars with water." When the jars had been filled, he said, "Now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies." So the servants followed his instructions. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. "A host always serves the best wine first," he said. "Then, when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you have kept the best until now." This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples. Jesus clears the temple. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw the dealers at the tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins on the floor over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my father's house into a marketplace." Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the scriptures. "Passion for God's house will consume me." But the Jewish leaders demanded, "What are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it." "All right," Jesus replied, "destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." What they what they exclaimed? "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days." But Jesus said this temple, when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the scriptures and what Jesus had said. Jesus and Nicodemus. Because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Now, Dave, if you could just read the part about wedding at Cana's. So it'll be from 1 to 12. And then, folks, we will discuss just that part. After the discussion, we will go to the Jesus cleanses the temple part. Then we'll go to the third one. All right. So Dave, from 1 to 12, please.
On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of the wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Women, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water, they knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they did not stay there many days.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. So folks, now, if you have comments, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Any comments you have on this part? We'll start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that this is, this is important for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's the first miracle of Christ. But I also think that it speaks to the importance of Mary as well, especially for when it comes to Catholics, that they always say, ask for the intercession of Mary. So at this, the idea of coming out when your mother has asked, and he said, my time has not yet come. It is, that is, she basically demands it. That is, it's of critical importance in development of Christianity overall. I mean, if you think about it in the sense of how Catholics view, and even Protestants view Mary as Saint Mary. So that's always been my main takeaway for this. I have some other comments, but I'll hold off from now.
Sure.
I'll make them in a minute.
Thank you. David Norton, go ahead.
Got to unmute myself. Okay. Well, the thing is, to me, number one, Jesus, it said that he speaks in parables, period. So the thing is, to me, this is obviously a parable of relationship. Number one, as mentioned, is his ability to take and transform things from one thing to another, which is like he's transforming the water into wine. And then they're talking about the marriage in Cana too. The significance to me in the marriage at Cana is the fact that there's also a marriage that takes place within inside of each one of his disciples and him as well. Because if you go to the one where he's talking, well, there's several of them where he talks about the necessity of being, the husbandman or something like that, or the marriage, and how that there binds together two people. And it's very, to me, significant because this is at the beginning of his preaching and of his whatever he's doing there. And the thing is, it has a lot to do with that. And then I can also relate it to, as a parable, to my own relationships that I've had in the past and my own marriages too, where he has not been there and where much difficulty has come into these relationships that have caused me to take and be divorced basically through infidelity, where once again, when people enter a marriage, they're looking for this purity and loyalty from each partner. And when that infidelity is there, then it causes all kinds of problems, of which I find that Jesus, through his words and through his teachings, is able to reconnect and more or less change the normal water into a beautiful wine with understanding of what's happened in the past.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is Kate.
Me, Kate?
Yes.
Or the other? Okay. What strikes me about the marriage analogy is the marriage was also the marriage of Jesus, the man, with Jesus, the God. And this was the first time that that publicly was happening. Jesus, the man, and Jesus, the God. And I am Catholic, so I did pay a lot of attention to Mary. And Mary was at the wedding before Jesus got there. And I think that's relevant with Mary, not just being the intercessor, but also being somewhat representative of Israel, and whether Israel was ready. And she said, basically, we're ready. Anyway, that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. I want to raise a couple of questions. The first question is, what does he mean when he says, my time has not yet come? Anybody who wants to answer that? So that's one. And second is, what is the significance of turning water into wine? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to say something. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, the transformation from water into wine is significant, all the way going up until the idea of transforming, even now in the Catholic Mass, the transformation of the water and wine into the blood of Christ, so that God transcends and has the power to transform. And it was, if I remember correctly, it was the best wine. It had been tasted at the ceremony itself. And that was something of significance as well, because it was, and I think it was Kate that mentioned the idea that it was Israel saying that their time had not yet come. That was Mary saying, the time has come, and that Christ was saying, my time hasn't, and she's saying it has, and that's the marriage of those two, a kind of, not marriage, but her telling him to come out and to reveal himself to the world. And I think it's significant too that it's not in Israel, it's in Cana. So anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, so when Jesus says my time has not yet come, I think he's talking about the heart of the people at the party. So I think the one thing is, like, Jesus just didn't want to be a parlor trick. He wanted to make sure that people were ready to hear his message. And he felt like if he had did miracles there, they weren't ready. It was a party. They were still living their best life. And so he felt like their hearts were not ready for him. So I think that's what that means. And talking about the water into wine part, I think Joe's right about the transformation, definitely. And the simple fact that, you turn the transformation of the body and blood of Christ. One thing I wanted to bring it to the attention is, if you ever study the biological crucifixion, from a doctor's standpoint, he says when they first pierced you, water came out and then the blood followed. And so I think he was talking about he was foreshadowing his crucifixion and how that was going to look. And the water into wine, the bloody, the wine into the blood of Jesus. I think it was all about that. So those were my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Katie. Katie, go ahead.
I did a quick Google on turning water into wine, and the only point I would add into that would be that to make wine, it takes a long time to ferment, and so that fits in well with my time has not come, because it needs time for that to kind of sit and brew and simmer. So that kind of ties in with what Joseph was saying.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Next, let's go to the second paragraph. Joe, could you read next part from 13 to 22?
Yeah, sure. Just give me one second.
Jacob had a point. Hold on for a second. Jacob had a point. Jacob, go ahead.
Thank you. There's a phrase here that caught my attention, and I was just thinking about it. And well, I'm going to sort of wax poetic here.
Please.
That's okay with everybody. This is not going to be academic. But in verse 10, basically, he's saying, "You've kept the good wine till now," and ultimately, that should be and could have been addressed to Jesus. He didn't know that Jesus had done the miracle, but it might as well have gone to Jesus, right? He did it. So Jesus kept the good wine until now. And it made me think that we live in a time of great cynicism, great cynicism. And to me, that's just so tragic, so many ways. And there's just sort of an prevailing idea in the West, and maybe that's why it's crumbling right now, but that there's nothing so grand and good as this biblical story, right? So there's no beautiful, joyous future for mankind coming. That's just too good to be true, right? Wine is, in the Bible, among other things, is a symbol of joy and rejoicing. And so Jesus has kept the good wine until now. You could say, well, the Christian hope is that he's kept the good wine till the end, so that the true Christian's looking forward to the good wine. And it's the opposite of cynicism. It's that there's something great and wonderful coming, and Jesus has kept it until now. So that was the thought.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jacob. Great point, as always. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by David. Brian.
Okay. I want to make it clear that I'm no expert on the Bible in any way, but a memory from my past is telling me that the significance of converting water into wine is that water represents the old religion, wine represents the new religion. I don't remember where I got it from. It's just something which came up in my mind.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is David.
Okay, the only thing I wanted to say is, you ask about my hour is not yet come. I just did a little research through Strong's. And the thing is, it's something I've heard in there before. And I noticed that same phrase is used like 6 times in the Gospel of John and once in the Gospel, or not a Gospel, in Revelations. So to me, that would sort of tie John to that, to those words within themselves, okay? But the whole thing is, John appears according to the content of the author, because the author of this book was somebody that was very close to Jesus, was someone that he loved. So with that, it would suggest that these words were added almost by John to this text somehow. Because if you take that sentence totally out of there and then read it as though that sentence is not in there, it just flows. But the thing is, when this sentence is thrown in there and the 5 other places in John, it sort of interrupts the flow and the meaning and the understanding of the presentation of the original author. So, to me, that's my opinion of that particular sentence.
Wonderful. When I asked this question to a friend of mine, he was drawing the parallels between Moses converting water into blood, and whereas Jesus converting water into wine, something which is life-giving, something that, that is going to make things thrive. Next up is going to be Joe reading the next paragraph. Anybody else who wants to read that paragraph again? We'll have 2 readings of it before we go forward. Joe, go ahead. Sure. From 13 to 22.
Okay. Jesus clears the temple courts. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at the table exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts. Both sheep and cattle he scattered. The coins of money changers, and overturned the tables. To those who sold the doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken for 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days. but the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. Now, while he was in Jerusalem,
Thank you.
Okay.
Joe,
Sorry.
let's go up to this, up to 22, and then we'll discuss it and go ahead. Jacob, would you like to read from some version?
So yeah, again, this is the Stephen Byington translation, also known as the Bible in Living English. And the Jews' Passover was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple precinct the sellers of cattle and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers in their seats. And he made a whip out of bits of rope, and drove them all out of the temple precinct, and the sheep and the cattle, and spilled the money changers' coins, and upset their tables, and said to the pigeon sellers, "Get these away from here. Do not make my Father's house a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Jealousy for your house will eat me up." So the Jews replied, "What token do you show us that you are doing this?" Jesus replied, "Wreck this temple, and I will set it up in 3 days." So the Jews said, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and will you set it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he rose from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said that, and believed the text of scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken.
Thank you, Jacob. Now, if anybody wants to comment on it, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Dave.
Yeah, this particular passage and similar passages in the Bible, actually, where Jesus becomes angry, right? He actually expresses the emotion of angry. He likely destroyed personal property. He actually took a material, whatever it might have been, leather or whatever, and made it into like a flogging instrument to whip people or flog, to get people to move, just like you do cattle, right? To get them moving in a direction, get them out of the place. He was quite upset, right? That's the way this reads. So for me, what's interesting is oftentimes Jesus is always seen as this pious, loving. Christianity is always about love, love your neighbor, don't harm other people. If people hit your right cheek, let them hit the other one, this type of thing. But it's a challenge for me to understand this a little bit. Jesus was without sin, and yet he found an appropriate time in which anger was an appropriate emotion. So for me, or us living the Christian life, how do you determine a righteous anger, and where do you draw that line, and on what topics? Abortion. I mean, there's just this myriad of topics where you could say, for that topic, anger is appropriate, right? But that's my comment.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dave. Next up is David Miller, Jacob, and Evanique. David, go ahead.
Yes, pardon me. From a historical perspective, the line that jumped out of me that made me query was the 46 years it took to build the temple. 46 years. So, what is that referring to? It couldn't be historically to the second temple, the temple that the Jews built when they returned from their Babylonian exile, their Babylonian captivity, because their date of return was 538 BC. And it's claimed, or it's written, that the temple construction was finished by 516 BC. So that makes 22 years. So possibly it's a reference, that's called the second temple. Possibly it's a reference to the third temple. So the third temple is Herod the Great, the Judean king, rebuilt, restored the temple. So perhaps it's a reference to that. Although from my memory, it's claimed that the construction of Herod's temple wasn't completed until 62 AD. So I assume that that's a reference to that final temple, of which the Wailing Wall is a part of. And although the Jews tell us that that's Solomon, part of Solomon's temple, it's actually built by Herod the Great, who the Jews claim is not a Jew. So it's somewhat historically ironical, all this. But so I'm assuming that reference of 46 years was to the temple that was restored, rebuilt by Herod the Great.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is Jacob, Evanique, Joe, and David. Jacob.
First of all, Dave made me think a bit, because usually when I picture this account with him with the whip, I've always loved this. Such strange behavior. he treats these men like animals. He drives them out among the animals. And that's actually a deep idea, because that is what happens when you go south. If you decide to give in to all your impulses and be utterly selfish and things. I mean, we know how that looks. People get animalistic. So he was treating them as such. But Dave mentioned that he was flogging them. So I always picture them just sort of with a whip, just intimidation, snapping the end of it, getting them moving. But it sounded like Dave saw that as like he was hitting them with the whip. And the account doesn't say. It could be either one, but that does help. Like you could read it as he wasn't hitting them with it, and then you could say instead of anger, righteous indignation, and then you'd have to have a discussion about, well, what's the difference? Was he wrathful, or was this controlled righteous indignation? And that's different from man's wrath. Like our wrath, when we get angry, it's stupid, right? We do stupid things. So I don't know if that helps, Dave, but I like you got me thinking along these lines, and so thanks for that.
Thank you, Jacob. Next up is Evanique, followed by Joe. Evanique.
Yeah, David got me thinking too, about God getting angry. And I understand why, you would have, people would have a problem with this, because like I said, Jesus is the mythical Jesus is what I call it, is the person that doesn't get angry. He's peaceful. He loves children. And then you see this image in the Bible and you're like, what? So I think that's the difference between the biblical Jesus and, the Jesus that we think of. And I think when he talks about God getting angry, when Jesus gets angry, well, Jesus is God. And we can see in the Old Testament throughout when God got angry with his people. I think it was in Isaiah where he talks about, that he's going to strip them down and leave them like a prostitute in the street or something. I'm paraphrasing. God gets angry with him. God shows his anger. God shows his wrath. He allows them to be taken into captivity and punished for sinning against God. So it's not like God gets angry. So of course, Jesus gets angry. And I think what Jacob was talking about, righteous anger. I think that's the difference. It's like we look at society and we think anger is a bad emotion, or anger is just an emotion, and it's an emotion to like an injustice that usually is like on us individually or collectively. So people get angry when they feel like there's an injustice happening, or they've been betrayed. So Jesus seeing this, and this is his Father's house, and you're just selling things, you're not there for the right reasons. And it goes back to the other part where Jesus knows their hearts, and Jesus knows that they're not ready for him yet. And so Jesus is like, his anger for his Father's house consumes him, because they're not treating his Father's house with the reverence that it deserves. and that they're just making a mockery of it. So of course, he's showing, not only is he showing his anger, he's showing his strength and showing that he can destroy this temple if he wanted to. So I think that's what that's about.
Thank you, Evanik. I was also struck by this, in the entire gospel. I was really struck by this moment because this is a moment of anger. And I think it has to do with the fact, I don't know, but that it is his father's house. He doesn't get angry when people do things to him. He doesn't get angry in other places. I don't know, if anybody else wants to talk about other instances where there is this righteous anger from Jesus and compare it to that, you're welcome to do that. And folks, you're welcome to read anything else that connects with whatever we are talking. Next up is Joe, David, and Jacob. Joe.
Yeah, I think that that's an accurate assessment, the idea that it is his father's house. And I also see there's a hierarchy of sin here as well, in the sense that my anger is justified because of usury within my father's house. So somehow it's that there is a justification for God's reaction, or for Christ's reaction in this particular instance, because he sees it so appalling that people are using his house to make transactions, in the sense that that they're turning his house into a marketplace, and they're treating their brothers like, which is kind of in the Old Testament as well, treating their brothers as a way of making money. And so I think that that's why Christ actually responds with such zeal, and the apostles, as it said, zeal for his father's house. So anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is David, followed by Jacob. David.
Okay, the thing is, this passage says so much. We could spend, I think, all day on this thing. But as far as his anger goes, Jesus outlines anger in the commandments that he gives, and where thou shalt not kill. He fixes that up and refers to anger, that we shouldn't be angry at one another. This is all found in Matthew chapter 5. Okay, and then here you got him taking and actually kicking out these people out of the temple. Okay, and with the money and with the livestock and everything that they have. And to me, the message that he is sending, that I see him sending, is that, hey, we're no longer going to do this kind of sacrifice. But the only thing is, unfortunately, it still happens today with many different theologies that are out there. And the thing is, to me, it even happens in the Christian religion too. And this here really sort of gives justification for it, because if you look on the other side of it, he's sort of saying, he could be saying, I don't believe this, but that, hey, we're getting rid of all this sacrificial theology where money is being exchanged for an animal that's being sacrificed for you, that really not doing anything for you at all. Okay. But in this instance where he gets rid of them, he actually is in a way making a substitute for himself. Okay, to where he is going to be the very last one that will ever be sacrificed for, and doing away with sacrificial theology or whatever ideology totally. So, but the thing is, to me, there are so many different avenues to go down with what is being said here and to be discussed. And once again, I say he speaks in parables, and it has a multiple meanings in many different ways, depending upon the person that's reading it and their background as to the understanding of the word and definitions that they have as they've been taught.
Thank you, David. Next up is Jacob.
This might be obvious to you guys, but I love how, why I love this text, this book, is that it applies there are several orders of application you can make to all of the words. There's a depth, and then there's a height, and as far as I can tell, it's there's no end either way. And so you can apply it at all these different scales. And so when you read, "Do not make my Father's house a market," in the Greek scriptures in the New Testament, Paul writes, every house is constructed by someone. He that constructed all things is God. So he's making a simple reference to the fact that God's the builder of the house, and the house is, depending at the scale you look at it, you could say the house is the universe. You could say the house is all being. You could say the house is the earth. It's the house for mankind. The body's a house. But let's just look at the scale of the earth as being the house God made for humans. Well, man, they've turned it into a market. The earth's a big market. Foul to me. I mean, the signs we have to read constantly and the commercials we have to listen to and just the constant pounding, right, has to be taking a toll on us, be bombarded the way we've been bombarded our entire lives by people who are just trying to get money from us. Like, that can't be good, right? So we can be confident that Jesus has the same indignation now as he did then at Marketplace Earth.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. I want to make a comment about the temple. I find the concept of temple here to be really profound, because he's saying that this is temple. This is a place for God on earth. He's also saying that his body is a temple where he is God and man as one. And he's talking about defiling of a temple. He is talking about, so it's on one hand, he's talking about the temple. On the other hand, he's talking about man. He's talking about his own body and what it means to be a temple, the body as a temple, which is God and man in one. And he's drawing the parallels between that. So I find it incredibly beautiful of how these metaphors work. Next up is Katie.
I think another thought that I had about money is that some people will be able to afford more than other people. So if you make it a marketplace, versus a temple is somewhere where everyone can go to worship God. And I feel like Jesus was also very helpful towards poor people and towards people who needed help.
Thank you, Katie. Next up is Evanique, followed by Jacob. Evanique.
Yeah, I was looking at scriptures where Jesus also shows righteous anger. And when he's talking to the Pharisees in Matthew 23, he says about them, he says, so practice and obey whatever they tell you, but don't follow their example. For they don't practice what they teach. They crush people with unbearable religious demands and never lift a finger to ease the burden. Everything they do is for show. On their arms, they wear extra wide prayer boxes with scripture verses inside, and they wear robes with extra long tassels. And they love to sit at the head of banquets at the seat of honor in synagogues. They love to receive respectful greetings as they walk into the marketplace and be called rabbi. So then going down, he talks about that they are whitewashed tombs, and they have a beautiful outside, but inside it's nothing. Like, these are examples, I think, of him showing anger at people who are just inauthentic and fake, and I think this is why he gets mad and starts turning over tables at the temple, because they're making a mockery of God's house. And I think part of that is the body, right, that Jacob was talking about earlier. But I think he also is making, because when people see that, and we can see this in today's culture, when people see Christians acting in a way that is not according to the Bible, they get disgusted with Christianity, just like I'm sure people in Jewish times were getting disgusted with with the rabbis and the Pharisees, because they were saying do all these things, but yet they're not doing it themselves. You know, they were requiring of people what they didn't require of themselves. And I think Jesus was like, this is just making a mockery of my Father. And it's like, if you disrespect the Father, you disrespect him. So those were just some other examples. And I think what everybody else said, just going along, I think that's true too.
Thank you, Evanik. I mean, I see this point come up again and again, kind of moving from external trappings, which have lost their meaning, to something internal, which has meaning. So people are substituting some external show in order to demonstrate to others their religiosity, as opposed to actual genuine religiosity. So I see that pattern again and again in, throughout the gospel. Next up is Jacob, followed by Dave. Jacob.
So on the temple, and what he means by, his body being the temple. I mean, yeah, what a topic, right? I think it was Yusha Khan who said that's a symbol of that union of man and God, and that's a credible idea. So I'm going to put out another idea and toss it around, or throw it in the trash, or eat it for dessert. Later on in Paul's writings, I think again it's Paul, and Peter, I think it was Peter, talks about those who are followers of Christ and who've entered into the new covenant with him and are in that relationship with him, are also the temple. He says the temple to which you yourselves are, I think is how he words it. And so the idea is that it wasn't just Christ who was a temple, but all his followers would be too. So that does beg the question, well, if that's a symbol of Christ being God and man, well, then that means that all of his followers are God and man, if they're also a temple. So that's something to wrestle with. Here's what's so cool to me, and this is something that hit me very, very recently, and I think it's just massive. So we're dealing right now with the whole groupthink thing, right? Group identities and versus individual, viewing someone as an individual or viewing them as a mouthpiece for a group. Like, that's so relevant right now, right? People aren't seeing people as individuals, they're seeing them as representatives of groups. And Jesus here saying, my body is the temple, he's referring to himself as an individual. And because you think about what is the temple? It's a place where groups would go and worship. And that was a good thing, but let's level up here, right? Christ is saying, that's good and fine, gather together. But ultimately, it's the individual who's performing the worship. The individual is the locus for worship. And you got to get that straight. And then, yeah, meet up with people and stuff. So he's actually, I would say he's reinforcing and promoting and putting on high the idea of the individual.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. Next up is Dave.
Yeah, real quick. So I'm in my late 50s, and most of my life since an early teen, I've been trying to follow in the image of Christ, right? If you read the scriptures, you try to do as he would do. And it's just this one scripture that we're actually studying now, this one little passage. I'll just close by saying I'm really challenged with this, because in the book of James in chapter 1, it says, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. So that kind of says, hey, being angry isn't really a good thing to do. It's not going to be pleasing to God. But this particular scripture that we just read, plus there's plenty of references where God would be doing a communication face-off with the scribes and Pharisees, right? He'd say, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, right? And I mean, if you're talking to somebody like that, it's not like, hey, let's go out and have a nice time together. He's facing off, and he's pushing their buttons a little bit, because he's not agreeing with their actions or their behaviors. And so for me, it's really been a challenge to live in the image of Christ, not really fully understanding the term that was really excellent, I think, was the righteous indignation, how to insert that when it's appropriate and still be in the context of what God's will is.
Thank you, Dave. You raise a profound question, and I would love to have people respond to that. David.
Okay, I will. The thing is, you pointed out like the woes and the woe to this and the woe to that. The thing is, Jesus was not a friend of the Pharisees and scribes, but they always seemed to be around him, And just like, taking and chasing these people out of the temple, with what they were doing. And once again, I should bring it up here if I can. You go back to the teaching that Jesus has in his commandments about thou shalt not kill. And the thing is, it goes down to the point of anger. And when he's talking about anger and, getting upset and things, he's referring to according to the teachings of his commands that he has. So the thing is, if something is fallen outside of that, okay, then, it's normal to be angry. It's normal to get upset over different things because you're not in agreement. Jesus is not in agreement with everything everybody said. Just like in Matthew, I think it's 16 or something, he refers to Peter as Satan, and quite frequently, he refers to Peter in a mean way. So, and he was one of his disciples. So, to think that, Jesus was just, unfortunately, the definition of the characterization of him through theology is that he was just a mediocre, nice guy. He didn't do anything wrong. Love one another as I have loved you. But the thing is, you have to dig into the content of what he's actually saying. He says, if you're going to love one another as I have loved you. And by doing that, you have to follow the commandments and the things that he says. And the thing is, apply them to each different thing that you're trying to analyze with. And really, the commandments should come before John. They are in the gospel. They're in Matthew, right straight up front in 5 through 7, But the thing is, in understanding them and applying them to your life will give a clearer picture to his anger and to what's happening here.
Thank you, David. Next up is Jacob, followed by Kate. Jacob.
So yeah, on wrath, Jesus' behavior here is consistent with the entire text. You can go to Ecclesiastes. There is a time for every affair under the sun, and then it goes on to say there's a time to kill. So what it looks like to me is that it's not about the behavior itself, it's the timing. It's when you do the thing. Because I don't know how many of you are believers in the principle of minimum necessary force. Maybe if you're a Brit, you are, right? Meaning, and I think we all fundamentally would agree with that. You don't want to use more force than necessary. But there's a time to kill suggests that sometimes minimum necessary force is to kill. Now, is that wrathful? I don't think it has to be. And if it is, it's the right time for wrath. And all the warnings against, don't be wrathful, don't do that. That seems to me to be a warning against man's uncontrolled wrath, which we are all famous for. So it's not an absolute commandment on all wrath under the sun, because we already know Ecclesiastes says there's a time to kill. So we have to we have to think about this. Scriptures are so nuanced, it doesn't tell you, it's not straightforward. And so again, I'm being repetitive, I apologize, but I think, well, I won't be repetitive, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jacob. Next up is Kate, David, and Evan. Kate.
I thought about this issue of getting angry in relationship to some of the things that I see happen to people on the internet. On one of my professional groups, I saw one of my colleagues attacked for, I thought, a fairly respectful disagreement about an issue, and she stuck to the issue. And then I saw some people do ad hominem attacks of her, and I I know her as a person. She's just not somebody on an internet list. And I sat for a long time and thought, I'm really angry about the people attacking her like that. I know her as a person, and I know she has, some integrity. But it took me everything I could do to write a fairly respectful but clear lay off. This isn't professional behavior for you to attack her. And then there was a deadly silence on the list, and nobody referred to it ever again. So while on the one hand, we're fearful about our anger, we're also letting a lot of things slide right now out of fear that somebody will get angry at us. So that's what it struck me about him being angry appropriately for things that were bad. And are we just uncomfortable with God doing that? Are we uncomfortable with ourselves doing that?
Well, thank you. Thank you. This is an amazing topic. Thank you. Next up is David, followed by Evanique. David.
Yes, this whole thing just reminded me of a story of that Jesus tells, and one of the things that he was asked is if he would give a sign, if there would be a sign given. And he says, no, he says, the only sign that's ever going to be given is a sign of Jonah. Okay, now, if anybody's read the book of Jonah, to me, I find it somewhat hilarious, but it does show God's anger inside of this here. So the thing is, if Jesus and God are the same, it's also showing the anger of Jesus Christ as well. Because the thing is, they give Jonah a responsibility to go talk to the Ninevites and to take and give them the message that God had for him to give. Well, naturally, Jonah didn't want to go there, so he gets on a boat going somewhere else. And then they come across the storm, and all the people in the boat, they know that God's got something against them because this is terrible. And then they find out that Jonah is the one that God is upset. They throw him overboard, I mean, that's real anger there in itself. And then he gets swallowed up by the fish, and then he comes to repentance again with God, and then the fish shoots him out on the beach, and he finally ends up in Nineveh, given the message that God wanted him to give. And then the Ninevites repent from, whatever it was that they wanted him to do. But inside of that story, I believe shows God's anger more or less to our own personal relationship with him, that when we're not following his commandments or what he wants us to do, our life is going to be made difficult, period. And to think that that is something that is lightly accepted, oh, well, he just wanted this, and be casual about it, it's not true. Because the thing is, it'll affect us. And right now as a nation, we're going through, many, many different things that are causing people to wonder. And therefore, by not following according to in his ways and following his commandments that he has in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. So just a thought.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is Evanique, followed by Mike. Evanique.
Yeah, I think one thing to point out is that Jesus was very clear about what he was angry about. And I think when you talk about anger and the expression of anger, human beings, a lot of times we're not clear as to what we're angry about. We let feelings and emotions get in the way, and perceptions and misperceptions get in the way. And sometimes we're angry about something that either didn't happen or it didn't happen the way that we intended it, or no, not the way that we intended it, but the way that we see it in our minds. Like we misinterpret actions, or we misinterpret like a facial expression. So I think Jesus is really clear about what he's angry about, and he pinpoints it and he says it. And he's like, this is why I am angry. You are making a marketplace of my Father's house. And I think one thing about Jesus in interpreting this anger is in Matthew 10, starting in verse 34, it says, don't imagine that I came to bring peace to the earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Your enemies will be right in your own household. So right there, he's telling you why he's here. he's showing people who they really are. Like, what is your character? And so when we think that Jesus is here to bring peace, he says, no, I'm not. So this is something that we've just created about Jesus, but this is the Jesus of the Bible. So
wonderful. I do have a comment on that, but let's first have Mike. Mike, you got 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. There's a key word here, since I hear we're taking this apart sentence by sentence. There's a key word called exegesis, where we try to get meaning from the words and from the sentence structure. Now, taking the wedding at Cana together with this section, we see a couple things. The first is that in the wedding of Cana, they talk about, we're only on number 2 to get to this money changer thing. In Matthew, we're up to chapter 19 already for this. So there's a lot more words in this. Now, the treatment in the wedding of Cana, he's not the son of God. He's the son of Joseph in the wedding of Cana. In the wedding of Cana, they don't mention Mary by name. They mention the mother of Jesus. Now, before I tell you what I think the scholars have who put this together are saying, I'll continue on to the money changers. In Matthew, they don't say that he made a whip, and they don't say he was angry, and they don't say he was a zealot, and that's Matthew and Luke kind of agree with each other, all this stuff, which they've used brevity before because they're only on chapter 2 already. They used brevity before. On chapter 2, they don't even say that he's going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. All that stuff came in this, which normally John is noted for his brevity. So
wonderful.
You had enough, or you want? Can I go to
Please,
to why
please
where
go ahead.
going with this?
Please go ahead.
Please go ahead. So they're only on chapter 2. He didn't make a whip. He didn't get angry. I'll save the Irenaeus discussion for later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could somebody, maybe David, if you could read that same part about the money changers in Matthew, would you be able to do that?
I was just looking for it. I don't know where it is.
Okay. If anybody can.
How about Luke 19:45, 19 verse 45, or Matthew 21 verse 12? But Luke is probably more. He was purifying the temple. I'll add one more thing. In John, Jesus's ministry included three Passovers, and in John, Jesus's ministry was only there for a total of 1 Passover. Now, there's a lot of things that scholars have came from this, but I'll save that for later.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for all the references. Really appreciate that. David, once you have it, just go ahead and type exclamation mark. All right. So I want to make a comment following up on Evanique and Jacob's comment, like father, like son. I also want to, okay, firstly, I want to say, look, I don't understand, I'm very new to this. So whatever observations I'm making are based on very little information, okay? So, but I'm trying to see patterns in it, and I'm just speaking out what I see. I see Old Testament as the foundation of the concept of God. And that remains the foundation for the New Testament. So if you look at the God of the Old Testament, anger is quite common actually in the Old Testament. It is there throughout. Now, that nature of God does not go away. And that anger is simply saying that you need to do the right thing on earth. You need to do the right thing. If you don't do the right thing, there's going to be trouble. Okay, there's going to be trouble in life. Sin is destructive. Sin leads to death. Don't do it. And the anger is based on that. That still remains true. What is it that the New Testament adds? What is it that Jesus adds? What Jesus adds is an understanding of sin at a psychological level. In some ways, Old Testament is about external things. New Testament moves it inside. It kind of moves, it's more psychological. It has a much deeper understanding of how actions are initiated by people, what goes on inside of your consciousness. And the core point that Jesus is bringing, in addition, on the top of the Old Testament, is the understanding of what happens when you repent for your sins and the power of doing that. And that facility, that capability is there for in each of us, no matter what we have done. And that gives us, if we choose to follow the right path, if we choose to follow Jesus Christ or God, and God at the same time, it means that those sins can be wiped away. That is the vision that is added on the top of it. Again, Old Testament is trying to get there, the concept of sacrifices, external sacrifices, but this is moved inside. So that's how I see it. Jacob, David, and Evanique. Jacob.
I love that you just said that about dividing the Old Testament and New into, what did you say, the external and then the internal. That's a great way of thinking about it. I think it's the same exact idea, just different words. I think about it in terms of the Old Testament being the body and the New Testament being the spirit, or psyche. Because psyche in Greek is soul. And so it's that psychology, right? And so that's the internal. So yeah, I love that you said that. And now, on the topic too of the wrath and the love, and there's this cosmic division that Old Testament's all wrath and New Testament's love and things. But here we see, if isolated instances where Christ is expressing wrath in the context of the loving New Testament. This gets missed so much, but if you read carefully the Old Testament, it has some of the most tender phrases you'll ever find. And honestly, in terms of tender poetry, the Old Testament just demolishes the New Testament. That's a matter of opinion, obviously, but I would love to share at some point with anyone who's interested verses that will just melt you, the way Jehovah was talking about his people. Like, I've engraved you on my hands. I have a picture of you on my hands. That's gorgeous. And so I don't like this division of wrath in the old and love in the new. It's not the right way of thinking about it, because old is laced with gorgeous, gorgeous, tender sayings.
No, that's beautifully put. I fully agree with that. And there are echoes of the New Testament in the Old, and there is the base of Old Testament in the New. So it is one work, but the emphases are different. And I definitely agree with you that there is just beautiful, beautiful poetry and tremendous amount of tenderness in the Old Testament. And I invite anybody to kind of read parts of the Old Testament, anything that you want to make a point, because we are in no hurry. This is a profound work, and I'm happy to, we should be taking our time to grasp as much as we can. So feel free to bring in anything that you would like. Next up is David, followed by Evanique. David.
Okay, I found the passage in Matthew.
Please
chapter-
go ahead.
Okay, it's chapter 21:12. Okay, and it says, and Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all of them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and said unto them, it is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. So that I think it's really good to take and look at that too, because it sort of gives us a different look at what John is saying, but they're both saying pretty much the same thing. So
Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is Evanique.
And when Jacob was talking about the beauty in the Old Testament, a verse in Psalm 139, starting in verse 13, really relates to this. It says, you made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life you recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. And I think of that, and I think when you were talking about Shrikant, about the psychological, and Jacob saying that, the Greek for psyche is the soul. And I think that's what Jesus was here to do, is to help us connect to that. And Jacob is right. It did that in the Old Testament. And according to Jesus, he is the fulfillment of the law. So he is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. So when he comes to help you discover who you are inward, because that's what matters, because it's what's from inside of it's from what's inside of the heart is where your character comes out. And so when I think about that, I was thinking about mental health and psychological issues, is that's all coming from the soul. And, on a real world level, a lot of psychological issues come from people that are hurt, people that are hurting from inside. And then they raise children that are hurt. And then it's a full cycle. And Jesus was coming in to heal that. And that's why, if people understand the Jesus of the Bible, they understand that he sees what's inside. He sees what your heart is. And he also sees people that want to change and can't figure it out. Now, today we have psychologists and psychiatrists that help us fill it out. And I totally agree with that. But I think sometimes what is missing is the connection, the spiritual connection. And it doesn't have to be Jesus Christ. Like, it doesn't have to be. But you need some type of spiritual connection. And even some psychologists will tell you that people will overcome insurmountable odds because they have a spiritual connection, whether they think it's source, whether they think it's Jesus, whether they think it's Allah. When they really feel connected to something spiritual, things change, along with other tools like psychology and, all those things. So I think that's what Jesus was coming to do. He was coming to fulfill the law. He was coming to heal, and he was looking for people that were willing to change.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Jacob, followed by David. Jacob.
I'm a little hesitant here. I hope this is okay to go here with this. This actually connects to COVID. These are potentially incendiary words, but this will test how civil we are, perhaps. Jesus would later, on this division of the soul and the body, Jesus would say something very profound in his ministry. He said that, fear not those who kill the body, but he that can destroy the soul. So he's like, look, don't put the body ahead of the soul. Don't put the body ahead of the invisible or the internal or the eternal thing. Because the idea of the soul is, that's your capacity for eternal life. It's irregardless of what happens to the body. Like, Jesus is the perfect example. His body died, but hey, he was resurrected. He's okay. His soul was intact. So there's an emphasis on letting the body go in place of the soul. So I've in the last 9 months, I've driven across country 6 times. I won't tell you why, but I've seen this, I've observed up close the condition of the soul of America, you could say, and it's not in good shape. It's like, it's a weird place. It's gotten weird, and now maybe there's pockets where things are still nice and dandy, but generally speaking, the soul of this country is hobbling and bleeding out. But our bodies are fine because we're all isolated and we got masks on. So it's like we're all falling for putting the body ahead of the soul. Fear not that which kills the body, but that which destroys the soul. And if we applied that principle, supposedly America is a Christian nation. If we applied that principle, we would be more concerned about the condition of the soul of America and not just the salvation of our bodies. Because right now, I know a lot of people that are alive and don't have COVID, but they're miserable. And their hopes are dashed and their dreams have been dashed because their businesses are closed and their relationships are screwed up because they've been isolated and they're giving into habits that they kicked 10 years ago. And when things are crumbling, right? And so that's how COVID connects here. You know, that's why the Bible's so alive. You know, a sentence of Christ applies massively to the COVID phenomenon. You know, it's like hell of a text.
Wonderful. Great point. Great point. Thank you. Next up is going to be David, followed by Mike. David.
Okay, you said we could read the other parts of the scriptures.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm going to go to Matthew, right there in chapter 5, where he sort of begins the Sermon on the Mount. It's a little bit into a little bit. It says, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." That means complete. "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these little commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you, except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven." And then his very first teaching here, it says, "Ye have heard that it was said of them of old time, thou shalt not kill. And whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment." The judgment is coming up in John 3, right after 3:16. "But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment, and whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council, but whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of the hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and here rememberest thou that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar and go thy way. But first be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift." Now, to me, Jesus Christ is explaining anger within this whole context of what is being said right here. And the thing is to grasp it in whatever way that he can teach it to whoever's listening to him is just a wonderful thing. And then apply it. This can be applied to everything on our daily lives. As we walk out the door, we meet people. These things can actually live within inside of us, and we can look at everybody as a brother in Christ, you know, and that happens until we find some kind of adverse event there. But still, we can be polite and go about it and treat them kindly, you know, no matter how bad it is. If they're really coming against us, it's really good because, you know, he says, go after get to know your adversary, because that's where you're going to learn something. And it's so true, you know. So anger really is sort of a good thing in a way.
Thank you, David. Next up is going to be Stanley. Stanley, go ahead.
I kind of just had a kind of larger question. So I know a lot of these texts were originally not written in English. So I was kind of wondering how you thought that perhaps the translation into English might have impacted some of the meaning in the text.
Sure, we will come to that. I mean, what we're doing is that we are kind of going with the text for now, but we will go ahead and anybody who wants is welcome to take up this question at any point in the future. Okay, thank you. Next up is going to be Mike, followed by Kate. Mike, you got 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, let me use some of that time to talk about the language. This thing was written in Greek, but sort of Pidgin Aramaic was the language of John. And John was not a man of letters. He was a semi-literate fisherman. And so the thoughts are given to some other people, including somebody whose name is Irenaeus, who was a scholar. There's another thing that ties into the COVID story here, which was brought up by Jacob. It turns out that the emperor at this time was a guy who is a hero to some of us because he brought Stoicism to the Western world, Marcus Aurelius. But Marcus Aurelius had a dark side. His mission in life was to blame the plague that was going on and the invasion of the barbarians from the West on the Christians. And so he decided Nero wasn't good enough about eradicating Christianity, so he was going to do the final job. So all the stuff you heard about lions and archers killing and gladiators killing Christians by the thousands was going on at the same time. So it was hazardous to your health to be a Christian in Rome or any of the territories, which went from basically from Spain to India. So
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
you want to hear the rest? You don't want to hear the rest of it.
Mike, let's try to keep it more focused towards the topic that we have. I think that will be much more effective. Okay,
Got it.
Okay. Next up is going to be Brian. What I do is that I give people who have not spoken before, I'm going to give them priority. Brian, go ahead.
So I'm sorry, we missed the change in hour. So I didn't catch.
Sorry, this was only for this one time because I'm traveling, but please go ahead, sir.
The last time this chapter, this episode deals with sacrifice, and the last time we looked at sacrifice was in the Old Testament, Cain and Abel, and then Abraham sacrificing his son. And we drew certain conclusions from that in the context of Jordan Peterson, or maybe more precisely, he drew context or conclusions. But here we have sacrifice again, and the context is very different. It's not sacrificing a child. It's not sacrifices in an agrarian context. It was possible for Cain and Abel to make sacrifice. We don't really know why the one was not accepted, but the blood sacrifice was accepted and the grain sacrifice was not. I just throw that out there. But here we've got the sacrificing in a different context, a more formalized context, a more urban context. And people aren't sacrificing their own grain or their own animals. They're buying animals to sacrifice. And it's not entirely clear, but Jesus has a problem with that. But I liked very much the quote that was made earlier, and that was what I think is more in terms of Jesus teaching, the ethicization of sacrifice. And the other person just pointed out, he's calling on you before you sacrifice, and he's not against giving money to the church. Before you make a sacrifice like giving money, get right with your fellow man. So that's pointing at the kind of the ethics and not the ritual aspect of the sacrifice.
Thank you, Brian. Next up is Kate. Kate, go ahead.
I'd just like to go back to what Jacob said, because I thought what he said was very important about the melees that is currently in our culture. I personally have to deal with that pretty much every day as part of my job. And it's one of the reasons I'm here, wanting to talk about a more spiritual dimension for addressing what's going on with the fears about the body. And I think what he made was a really important statement, and one that I hope we will be able to intersperse in all of our discussions.
Wonderful. So in response, give me just a second. Let me go ahead and mute. There is a echo. All right. In response to Jacob, I want to read out from Corinthians 2, number 5. That's one of my favorites. The point that Jacob is making about the spirit and the body. I think this is the best place that I've seen. Would anybody like to read from Corinthian? The people, this is 2 Corinthians number 5, our heavenly dwelling. Do I have any volunteers to read? Because I'm not used to reading this. I don't think I do a good enough job. Evanique.
You said 2 Corinthians 5?
5.
What verse? Or just start at verse 1?
You can just start with one verse and just go through the entire number 5. So that is up to number 21.
Okay. For we know that when this earthly tent we live in is taken down, that is, when we die and leave this earthly body, we will have a house in heaven, an eternal body made for us by God himself and not by human hands. We grow weary in our present bodies, and we long to put on our heavenly bodies like new clothing. For we will put on heavenly bodies. We will not be spirits without bodies. While we live in these earthly bodies, we groan and sigh. But it is not that we want to die and get rid of these bodies that clothe us. Rather, we want to put on our new bodies so that these dying bodies will be swallowed up by life. God himself has prepared us for this, and as a guarantee, he has given us his Holy Spirit. So we are always confident, even though we know that as long as we live in these bodies, we are not home with the Lord. For we live by believing and not by seeing. Yes, we are fully confident, and we would rather be away from these earthly bodies, for then we will be at home with the Lord. So whether we are here in this body or away from this body, our goal is to please him. So, for we must all stand before Christ to be judged. We will each receive whatever we deserve for the good or evil we have done in this earthly body. We are God's ambassadors. Because we understand our fearful response to the Lord, we work hard to persuade others. God knows we are sincere, and I hope you know this too. Are we commending ourselves to you again? No. We are giving you a reason to be proud of us, so you can answer those who brag about having a spectacular ministry rather than having a sincere heart. If it seems we are crazy, it is to bring glory to God. And if we are in our right minds, it is for your benefit. Either way, Christ's love controls us. Since we believe that Christ died for all, we also believe that we have died to our old life. He died for everyone so that those who receive his new life will no longer live for themselves. Instead, they will live for Christ who died and was raised for them. So we have stopped evaluating others from a human point of view. At one time, we thought of Christ merely from a human point of view. How different we know him now. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become.
Your computer, how to.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that.
No worries. This means that anyone who belongs in Christ becomes a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. And all of this is a gift from God who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. For God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against him. And he gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with Christ through Jesus.
Thank you. Thank you. I really like this because anyway, if anybody wants to comment on this, because I think what it is, I mean, this is kind of explicitly talking about man and God at the same time. And most people are just focused on the man part and lose track of the spirit. And I think I think Jacob is right that in modern times, and I don't think it is only COVID, I think COVID has just exacerbated and kind of intensified some of the things that is happening. But I think people have lost track of the soul, lost track of the spirit, and they regard it as optional. They regard it as unimportant, and occasionally they will think of it. So anyway, so just wanted to do that. All right. Next up is Katie.
This was a comment from before. I had kind of some thoughts in my head of like when I was a child, thinking that wrath literally meant punishment rather than like being angry and then wanting to punish because you perceive like people to be doing something wrong. And I'm wondering, I'm like thinking in my mind, why does that make sense to me that I only saw it as punishment, and that I was like maybe a little bit surprised that God could be angry. And I'm starting to reflect, is it because I had an image of God as forgiving, or is it because like, how would that be free will if you really only wants you to choose to do right? I'm trying to like reflect back on why like God getting angry would not make sense. Why I wouldn't have been able to see the anger in it.
Thank you, Katie. All right, if there is nothing else, we can go ahead to the next paragraph. Who would like to read I think this is the last one. David, followed by Joe. David.
Wait a second. I wanted to make a comment on this.
Please. You can always make comments. Go ahead.
Okay. The thing is, it was brought up before about the different cultures and the different languages of the Bible at the time. Now, it's important to note that, when Jesus Christ was crucified and on the cross, that Pilate had a sign put up above his head. Okay. And he put it up in 3 different languages. One was Hebrew. The second was in Greek. And the third was in Latin. Okay. So all 3 of these different languages were dominant at the time of Jesus. So he would have been familiar with all 3 of these cultures to some degree. Now, the thing is, it fascinates me. I'm hearing this word come up, soul, a lot. Soul is actually a Latin word. It's not a Greek word, but a Latin word. And the Greek translation most of the time is psyche, okay, which we turn into mind. As a matter of fact, a lot of our words, psychologists and this and that and everything, come from that Greek word. The whole psychologist, the whole thing comes from Greek. But anyway, the thing is, these different cultures make a big difference as to how we actually read and see what we're reading. And it has a big, big influence because we've taken these words and made English words out of them. And sometimes they maintain the original definition, and sometimes they take and are totally, totally different. So when we see the word, we see something different than what was actually intended to be presented to begin with.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Jacob. Brian.
Yes, I'd just like to follow up on what I was talking about earlier. I'm kind of interested in the role of sacrifice, especially out of this temple incident. He didn't object to people contributing money to the temple, but then it's, as came out in this in the text that was just read from Corinthians, Jesus becomes the sacrifice. And then sacrifice, I think, if we take that on board, sacrifice becomes less important, at least doesn't have the same significance that it used to have in the Old Testament. and you shift away from the ritual of sacrifice towards a ritual of remembering the sacrifice that Jesus made. And then also, I believe that a stress away from the act or the ritual of sacrifice towards just a pure, more of a belief, and then the ethical point that was made earlier. That's all I wanted to add.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Jacob, followed by Joe. Jacob.
Yeah, just to address something David said, and I assure you, David, this is no hammering on you at all. It's just the idea, because the idea you present, it's not an unpopular one, that there's so much lost in translation and that there's trouble of words, and we're sort of doomed to like never being able to reel it in and figure it out. A couple of things. First of all, like with that attitude, it's like, why try then? It's like we're in such a morass, such a mess with this. There's always going to be the problem that this might not be the meaning of, and I think that's basically at the heart of postmodernism. That idea comes out of, that's a core tenet of postmodernism, is that you can translate texts in infinite number of ways, and so no narrative has any supremacy over any other one. They're all relative, and so truth is relative. It's that whole idea, and it's like that just freezes us. If it's all just that, then why do anything? More importantly, though, is that if you believe in the power of the word, in the beginning was the word. Everything started, the word preceded everything and then generated everything. So the idea of Christ as the word, it's like you have to believe in the power of the word to believe in the power of the Christ. And if you believe in the power of the word, then the truth can traverse language. And if you start with the premise that, well, God wrote the book, well, he has no problem with dealing with the trouble of translation. Like, it's not a problem, right? He can make the meaning survive the translation. He could, let's use Christian language. He can bless the efforts of those who are sincerely trying to do it properly. And there are a lot of human beings that have dedicated their lives to translating that thing properly, and they've poured their souls into it. The Byington translation, this man spent 40 years on a train to and from work translating. He spent his train rides to and from work translating. This man cared about it, and he worked hard, and he studied the languages. And to say that, well, we can't get the meaning from his work, it's just like, it kills all human endeavor. It's like a dangerous idea. It's a bad idea, especially if anyone claims to be Christian, to just say the word is inadequate and misleads us whenever we try to work with it. It's in some sense a denial of the Christ, you could say. I'm not saying, David, you're denying Christ, just to be sure, but the idea is a dangerous one, and that's why I'm lashing out on it. I think it's just devastating.
Thank you, Jacob. And folks, please feel free to express yourself as clearly as you can, because it's important to get things right. And it's important to actually have a conversation at this level. So thank you, Jacob, and thank you, David. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by David. Joe.
I just wanted to make a quick point about Jesus's wrath in the temple. Is the one thing that by expressing his wrath, he's also incurring the wrath of the hierarchy. And so that allows him to eventually fulfill the prophecy. So, and he's speaking truth, right? And he's speaking about the idea of you making God's house a marketplace. And yours now I can fulfill, that then the leadership, or the Jewish leaders at that particular moment in time, were then angered by this, essentially his reaction, and he started to garner the attention of people. So this allows him eventually to fulfill, it leads to his own crucifixion, his, exposing himself like this. So it's just in a practical sense. Just thought I would put that out there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is David, followed by Mike. David.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I'm not trying to take and push my beliefs or anything on anybody else. To me, the thing is, Jesus Christ is all about testimony. And the thing is, the way that each person sees Jesus Christ and his words, and they speak out, that's their testimony of his words. The thing is, when I talk about the things that I am talking about, really, I'm sort of following his commandment that says, number one, seek, and then ask, and then knock, and that there is a primary fundamental commandment that Jesus gives to all of us. And naturally, we're all going to go down a different path because we have different environments. And something like a platform like this is, to me, a very wonderful thing in which all people can come together and make their speech, and we all can learn from one another and not accept necessarily the doctrine of one another, but take and use it to sort of like a cow chews their cud and think about it and meditate on it and see where it fits in our lives. If it does, and a lot of times the stuff we learn will not fit in our lives. And that's why Jesus speaks in parables. So we all can gather something different from whatever he says. And I just love it. That to me is
wonderful. Thank you, David and Jacob. I see this is what this format is about, where everybody can fully express. See, this is all knowledge is individual. The quest is individual. It's like you are trying to pursue the truth, and that is sacred. So each of our own understanding of whatever of the world, of our own lives is sacred, and that is most important thing. So never, it's not, only on the secondary it is social. And the social part is also important because it allows us to actually see another spirit operating, in their authentic way. And there is so much to be learned from each other, but it doesn't change the fact that the primary relationship is between you and God. And that is true for each and every one of us. And this entire discussion, our entire meetups, are based on the idea of what I call joint exploration, that each of us is doing this. We see that each of us is doing it, and we are seeing that we are trying to do the same thing. So we are being honest and direct with each other. And there are going to be disagreements about all kinds of things. And there is nothing wrong with that. Each of us has to follow our own path. So I really, encourage you to pursue that, to speak very openly whenever you have any disagreements, and do so courteously. That's the courteousness is also respecting the authenticness, identity of the other people, and not confusing the ideas of the other people with the core of the individual being of the other person, which is sacred. So thank you very much, folks. Next up is going to be Mike, Dave, and Ambika. Mike, you got 2 minutes. And please try to keep it on the topic, please.
On the topics that someone else brought up, I won't even need 2 minutes. We talked about language, that they didn't speak English and they didn't know about NIV versus King James. The authoritative manuscripts are in Greek, even though that wasn't their native language either. Now, Greek, we learned from Brian McVeigh that they didn't use a written language that was read silently. There's punctuation and cantillation and trope in terms of kind of a musical scale on these, where there's a precision way to chant each of these things. And the meaning changed as to how they were chanted. Now, when they translated to English, all that stuff was lost. When it was translated to Spanish or even Latin, all that stuff was lost. And so as to subject, predicate, pronouns, articles, and further, there wasn't any spacing in Greek between the words. They were all run together. So unless you chanted it, then you had some recognition of the music that was in there. You got an entirely different meaning out of some of these things. You wouldn't want me to try and imitate a Greek chanter, but believe me, it's complicated. I think Jeff, who's also been silent through most of this, has some background in cantillation. Thank you.
Thank you.
1 minute, 15 seconds.
Impressive, very impressive. I think if I give you 1 minute, you will see, Mike, I love your erudition. I love the range of things that you bring. All you have to do is to kind of keep it on topic, and I think giving a time limit is the best way.
Wasn't this on topic?
It was very much on topic. It was very much on topic. I'm making this general point for the future. Thank you, sir. Next up is going to be Dave, Ambika, and Jacob. Dave.
Right. So during the wrap-up period here, I just wanted to say thank you for having the meetup. And the question I have, trying to walk in the steps of Jesus, trying to study his word so that we can attempt to make decisions as he would make them, live as he would want us to live, know his will. That's just a continual study, right? Trying to do that every day. And the environment certainly is not conducive to making it easy on us and trying to do that. So I just wanted to thank you. And obviously the question of anger and how to display it, when is it appropriate and not, it draws a lot of contention, a lot of questions around when is it appropriate. So tonight it really helped me know that this certainly is a complex issue. So it's not just me and my ineptitude when I'm reading the scripture, but it's actually a quite complex topic. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And welcome to our meetups. Next up is going to be Ambika, followed by Jacob. We are in no hurry to wrap up. So we are going to just continue this until we kind of figure, we look at these things. So please take your time. Go ahead, Ambika.
I wanted to say I have not read it recently, so I don't know a lot anymore, but I like the context you provided, Shrikant, that it is an individual journey on some level, even though there are so many interpretations. And I wanted to, Jacob brought up the idea of the soul of the country, and it's true, but it also reflects individual souls that are suffering. And it makes me wonder then, where do we individually make the choices to take different actions to weave a healthy America, healthy United States, a healthy world, so we don't fall into the web of deception. And I think it's really important that you're doing this, because I want to know more too. And this is amazing. And may I just because it's today's Diwali, wish you all a happy Diwali.
Thank you. Folks, it is Diwali in India, which is a festival of light. And so thank you very much, Ambika. Next up is Jacob.
I feel stupid asking this. That Festival of Light, that's not where all the colors of chalk. No, that's something else. All the chalky colors.
No. But the thing is that everything in India is colorful. Okay, so it's
right,
just different. Yeah.
And you see.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jacob.
So typical ignorant American, don't know anything about the rest of the world. On this topic of translation, I think just about 20 minutes ago we had a young man it was rice, not chalk, rice. Thank you. More ignorance. A young man came in and asked the question, because of translation, does that create problems? He's not alone in that. So many people I talk to, the problem of lost in translation prevents them from the text. It keeps them from the text because it's such a daunting problem. It's like, well, I'm going to invest myself into this book that's impossible to read to begin with, and is going to require like decades to understand, and it's, you know, it's such an undertaking. But then to go into that with this prevailing idea that there's this problem that you might not even be reading what was written, and it's like, well, who would ever want to do that? Like, I wouldn't want to. That's so. A way to think about it is that it's not even a problem. It's like, don't even worry about what's not there. Just worry about what's there, because the text itself, let's say half of it's missing. Like, I think, I forget the gentleman's name, but said the incantation part, or the audible part is lost, the chanting and so forth, and there's a meaning in that current, and that's all lost. Well, let's say it is. Well, you still got a bunch of text here that's really, really hard to understand. So you could still just go in and forget all the stuff that's lost. And at least that's like a little more promising, right?
Yep.
Agreed.
So I have a lot to say about this, because this is, again, this is an idea that we have looked at quite a bit during these meetups. So firstly, I would say Bible is particularly easy to understand because it is doing it in 4 different ways. You know, you can look at it literally, you can look at the stories and the meaning of stories, you can look at the morals in it, and you can look at it, what is it pointing to? So this kind of 4-fold way of looking at it. The translation problem is mostly about the literal issue. The stories, stories are not affected too much by that. The morals are clear enough in most languages. So that's one point, that this way of, using this multi-pronged way, the exegesis, is a great way of approaching it. You're not just saying, what does this sentence mean? And you're trying to dig into the meaning of each of the words. So that's one thing. The second point I wanted to make is that we're doing these meetups on Dao De Jing. Dao De Jing is written in Chinese in 500 BC, in a culture that we don't know, where there is no continuity of the context. You have all the context of the Bible that is permeating throughout this society. So that is actually a far more important thing than the language, because you have this meaning, it's being carried in the persons of everybody around you, many people around you. In Dao De Jing, the way we are approaching it is that everybody is using multiple translations, and they are using translations that speak to them. One of the key points of Dao De Jing, I'm not doing the right intonations here, but one of the key points is that you're trying to understand the Dao. Words are a way of understanding the Dao. Words are just the means of getting at what is. What you're really focused on is what is. Don't be focused on words alone. Words are simply pointing through the truth. And so it is your commitment to getting at the truth. What matters. And you have to go through whatever words you want, and you can use multiple translations, multiple things in order to get that. So your connection with the Tao, with the nature, with God is what really matters. The next point I want to make is about writing and speaking, and writing versus conversation. This is a point that Walter Ong makes. And in this sense, we are actually going back to the original way in which writing was being used, where we are not just taking the word, right? See, after the books, after printing, people just take the book and try to read it. The person is not there. The author is not there. The words are there, but the author is not there. And the old way in which, the original way in which the writing was used is that it was always done in conjunction with conversation. So whether it was the peripatetic school of Aristotle, where the students are going around reading text, talking about it, disagreeing on it, and then writing it up again and using that as a base. For the same tradition was done in the Gurukuls of India. The same thing was done in the monasteries in the Middle Ages, where there is a speaking out of the text. There is levels, and this is what that is there in the Torah. You have these multiple commentaries of different people, and people go back and forth between people on those commentaries. And what that does is that it captures the entire richness. In that sense, the oral language in a conversational format is far richer than just writing. Writing is a digitized version of the oral conversation. It captures some things, but not everything. You have to bring it back. Jesus did not write anything. He just spoke, because through the speaking, his character shone through, which was far more important. Somebody asked the question, how did people believe that he was the Messiah before he had done any miracles? You can actually see people. All of that is carried in the oral, and you have all of this, all of these abilities in order to get at the meaning of things. So I fundamentally agree with Jacob that don't be fazed by translation. You have all these tools, and you have to use all these tools and work with everybody using, many people using all these tools in order to get at the meaning of things. All right, next up is going to be Evanik, followed by Jacob. Evanik.
Yeah, first of all, what you said was just beautiful, Shrikant, so thank you. I think one of the things is the reason why people get caught up in translations and things of that nature is because the Bible has been used by world leaders to control and to have power, to gain power, and to keep power. And if you can rule under, if you can show scripture, it's kind of like you have you have an edict from God, or you're blessed by God, or something of that nature, and churches have used it. So I think your point about using about having it be literature, understanding that it's literature, stories, morals, and what is it pointing to? I think when you study the Bible for yourself, you get all that, so right now I'm unchurched, and so for me, studying the Bible is a personal journey now. I think if you take it as a personal journey, which is what it's meant to be, and what Jesus gets to in all of the New Testament, is about what inside that counts. It's about what you're looking for that counts. And it's about who you are on the inside that counts. But it's really, it sounds cliche, but it's not, because out of your heart is how you enjoy life. It's from what is inside of you that allows you to really understand life for yourself and to understand your purpose. If you're looking for that, that's how you find fulfillment. If you're looking outside of yourself for any of these things, then if you're looking outside of yourself for fulfillment or love or anything else, that's where you get lost. And I think Jesus is pointing that out to us. And I think if people study that, just like you said in what you said earlier, just now, actually, what you just said, if people are looking to it and really studying with other people for the purpose of really finding out the truth, that's the whole point. And I think that's the whole point of Jesus's life, is finding the truth and finding out what is true for you from the inside of you, and not letting other people, not saying, I want to say not letting other people influence, but like knowing who you are truly, and allowing other people, getting thoughts from other people, but not allowing them to influence you. And I don't think I said that right, but somebody please say that better than I can, because I can't think of any better words.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Jacob, followed by Brian. Jacob.
So just to clarify, I don't exactly think, when I say that don't worry about translation, it's not because I think that the words are merely vehicles and that there's something behind the words that's the essential meaning, and that the words in some sense are, just some kind of shell or or initial contact with the idea or something. Because I don't think that I actually think it's the words. So, and this is an interesting point, because this is exactly where the Bible and the Dao De Jing go in deep conflict.
Yes.
Chapter 1, verse 1, the spoken Tao is not the yes. Eternal Tao, right? So those two ideas can't exist, like, because that's saying that the words are merely pointing, and the Bible does the idea of the word in the Bible is that the word itself is creative. The word itself is creative, and so for the word itself to be creative, it has to be a true word, and that truthful words are creative in themselves. And the Dao De Jing is sort of saying the opposite, right? And then you might look at, well, the Bible, the reason we are on the edge of all time, because we're in the present, which is the deepest part of the future man has ever known, right? That's implied. Here we are. And here's this book still with us. So this book has lasted, as we know, it is just the words, because the book, you open it up, there's not people there. I mean, there are people, there's stories of people, but there's words there, and the words themselves have been able to contain the stories. They're sufficient to contain the story. So there's an idea of adequacy. The word is adequate to present truth. And the idea in the Dao De Jing is that it's inadequate to present truth. What I see happening, or to present absolute ultimate truth. What I see happening, though, is that those ideas try to get merged all the time. It's like we might be reading the Bible and someone might be saying, well, these words are just pointing. I don't know if you said that, Shrikant, I don't know if you're saying the Bible's words are just pointing, but then we're marrying the two ideas now. We're marrying the idea of the Bible with the Dao De Jing, and I don't think that ever works out well. I think we just get confused when that happens. And I do it all the time. We all do it all the time. We don't have all this stuff straight, but sometimes when we overlap them and we conflate them, that's where things get, difficult to grasp. So.
Yeah, no, that's excellent point. This is a very, very profound point. This is really, the kinds of things that are at the cutting edge of what the world is trying to figure out right now. Because this is like East and West. This is saying, East has a certain way of doing that, of looking at philosophy, looking at the world. It is very intuitive. It is trying to grasp the whole thing. It is very, very skeptical about words, anything definite. It is trying to say, if I try to do something definite, I will lose my intuition. But at the same time, it is very deeply intuitive. It is trying to getting at some things. So there is that. West, on the other hand, and you're absolutely right. It's those two sentences, Dao De Jing starts by saying, anything that can be named is not the real thing. Whereas in the beginning was the word. That's exactly opposite, okay? So what resolves it? Or what is it? What does the combination look like? So another way of putting it is my friend Yasuhiko, who is a Japanese philosopher, put it very beautifully. He says, the way in which West proceeds, anyway, let's not go into, let me put it in my own words. Okay, so it's a question of what words are. And I think the clue to that is Jesus, of being God and man. So the words, in some aspects, I mean, again, again, this is just very new to me. But what I'm saying is that this is the core issue between East and the West, as best as I understand it. West, because now step back from the Bible, look at the West as a whole. Look at Aristotle, look at science, look at mathematics, look at technology. This is all Western things. They are all about precisely naming things. It is all about naming. It is all about very sophisticated ways of checking your naming. That's what science is. You've said this, what is the basis for it? You've said this, how do I test this? How do I modify it? So working on words as an instrument, working on things, again, Dao De Jing not only talks ill of the word, but it also talks about the 10,000 things that the words produce. And West is about transformation of the world. It is about making things. So it's a very fundamentally different approach to it. But I think there is an integration to it. There is things that West can learn from the East. So for example, Jacob, you were complaining about the spirit was lost. East does not lose spirit. It always never loses spirit. That is a core part, because it is, the spirit is alive. It will lose words. It will not lose spirit. Okay. It will lose words. It will lose things. It can get very, very bad in terms of the actual life, whether it is caste systems, Chinese top-down hierarchies. It can mess things up really badly. Okay, West is much better at that. It has much more kind of checks and balances, all kinds of ideas to take care of it. But so what I'm saying is that each of these have to learn from each other. And folks, we are looking at Dao De Jing and China and Chinese ideas, these ideas in detail, and what that has to offer you. And when I say that it is individual quest, you have to decide. You have to look at Dao De Jing and say, what is it? What is it saying, and how much of it? What do I get from it? Interface with it. Don't take it. Similarly, you're looking at Bible. I'm soon starting Bhagavad Gita on Fridays, not tomorrow, but the Friday after that, I'm going to start Bhagavad Gita, and we'll look at all of these things in parallel. It's an individual quest. It's not about, I'm going on too long, but this is really the heart of the problem that is being worked out. These three sets of ideas have developed separately on separate islands, because those Himalayan mountains and Tibetan plateaus are kind of, are not very easily crossable. So these, China, India, and the West have developed separately. What is happening now is that it's possible to see the commonalities and differences and try to put it together, because I think each of them have things to offer the other. West is good at words and at transforming things. That's a genuine thing that West has brought to the world. China knows about balance, about health, and how you need to be sensitive to these balances and work with them. That's how the Chinese mind, that's a very deep idea. And that India is focused on consciousness and how consciousness operates for thousands of years. It has things to teach. Meditation is just one of them. There is a lot there. And you have to say yes to all of them and try to integrate it in your own way, in your own life. That is the upside that I see here. So thank you very much for bringing this point. So next up is going to be Brian, Evanique, Jacob, and David. Brian.
Well, first of all, I don't know if I have much to add to all that. I think that it was beautiful and brilliant, everything that Jacob has said and that you've said, others on this topic. I'll just, it strikes me that all these issues on translation that have been highlighted on translation arise even in the absence of translation. There's disagreement about what words say or whether there should be an authoritative meaning, even if there's no translation involved. And I think that was true before we used the word and we were using, and the Greeks or whoever wrote these texts was using the word logos. Probably no agreement at what logos meant. The other thing I'll say, I was once, my wife and I were invited by some good friends in Brooklyn, New York, to go with them to the Catholic Church and listen to the beautiful singing, and it really, really was amazing. And then the priest gave a talk, his homily, his speech, and at the end, he said, we all worship the same God, but we all have our own understanding of the God. There are probably as many gods in this room. He said, this is the Catholic priest talking. He says, there are as many gods in this room as there are people. And you're all welcome to bring your own understanding of the God, of your God, to the communion table and partake in the communion. That, as far as I understand it, is a very un-Catholic approach, because the Catholic Church likes to say, we know who is God and we're going to tell you who God is. But this is a very different approach, and recognition by this priest, who is also a monk. This church is operated out of a monastery, that there is inevitably different understandings, but there all can be authentic, sincere beliefs. Now, even though we all have, the last thing I'd say is, even though we all have individual, and there's maybe necessarily, let's say it's almost necessarily never entirely the same, there can be agreement, even though it's not provided by an authority, there can be agreement on what a lot of these words mean. And exploring the agreement is, I think, is for me, one of the real benefits of these meetups. The other one, I guess the last point is, just as Shrikant said, it's also looking at, and others have said as well, I'm always delighted and enlightened to hear other people's insights. It complements and completes my own. In addition to example, I mean, we could pick around on like what the word means, but hey, when you start reading Dao De Jing and you see they have a very different approach to words, that helps to bring into focus the role and concept of words in the Christian texts. So to get an understanding of even what you think the words might mean, listen to what other people say and read other different contexts in which the word is used.
Wonderful, Brian. I wanted to tell you that, like, I was looking at the history of the Catholic Church and looking at all the thoughts that have been prevalent and part of the church across time. You look at Augustine and you look at Aquinas, and there is a tremendous range. It is not one interpretation. So there is as large a variation within the Catholic Church as is there within philosophies. There is Platonic approach to it, there is Aristotelian approach to it. So it is enormously rich work that we are talking about. And all of these people have coexisted. They have had conversations. Some of them have been part of the hierarchy. Some of them have been heretics at a time. Then they have become part of the hierarchy. So there is this entire history. A friend of mine was saying, oh, if you're doing John, you should definitely incorporate Thomas Aquinas' comments. I just looked it up. I think it is 5,000 pages on Gospel of John, somewhere between 1,500 to 5,000 pages of commentary of Thomas Aquinas on the Gospel of John. So this is enormously rich work. Okay, so thank you, Brian. Really appreciate that. Next up is Evanique, Jacob, and David. Evanique.
Yeah, I actually have a different viewpoint on the Dao De Jing and the Bible. I think they are two sides of the same coin. And in the Dao De Jing, the Christian translation of it is, the God who can be described is not the true God. The name that can be spoken is not the name of God. And I think in John, I think God is indescribable. I think the Tao gets it right. And I think in the Bible, the God is, in a sense, indescribable. What he creates, what he uses is words to create the earth and to create the trees. And so I think I don't see it as competing or opposite. I think I see it, like you said, Shrikant, as an integration. And in the second verse, it says, God is unnameable. Naming God is the beginning of religion. I think if you are looking for God, and trying to describe God, I think, you know, it does, it kind of goes to what he's saying is like, it does create religion. It creates like an organized thing. And we as human beings are trying to understand God in our own mind, which is almost impossible. So that's what I see basically what they're saying in Dao De Jing. And I think the God of the Bible saying the same thing. It's like we're trying to use human words to describe God, and there's no way to do that. So I see it as similar. But what I also see is that like the whole Jordan Peterson series where he talks about order and chaos. And I see God as bringing order to chaos and using words to do that. But I think when we get into having human beings trying to take on an understanding of God and saying that they understand God, I think that's where we get in trouble. And I think that's where things get misinterpreted. So I just see it as an integration, much more so as like one opposite the other. I think they kind of describe the same thing, but in different ways.
Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is going to be Jacob, David, and Katie. Jacob.
So Shrikant, if we can become very good friends, then we will have saved the world, right? merge these two things.
Let's do that.
So I love this. This is like actually a conversation I've been wanting to have that I haven't been able to have properly. So I'm really excited. Forgive me. I think part of the solution is to talk about how, well, what all the East can sort of do is observe the West, right? And if the West is kind of messing up how they're representing the word, then we have a problem on both sides. I think there's a misapprehension of what the word is, because the East says, well, the word is concrete. You're naming something and you're labeling it and it's done. It's like, that's not exactly the idea as painted in the scriptures. Because there's this idea of a splitting constantly happening. And you see that in the natural world. You have cells that divide, and you have, well, two people come together and they have relations and a new form is born. I experienced that with the word. So most practically speaking, I might read a verse, and I might read this verse several times, and these sets of words have meanings to me. However, I might be reading somewhere else in the scriptures, and I'll think of this other verse somewhere else. I'll go back to it, and now that this idea here has touched this other idea that I was reading, when they come together, a new idea emerges. And so there isn't this thing where it's set. Now it's set temporarily, you might say. Like you might say, well, like this is what that means. But it's a constant building to expand the picture. So it's not as concrete. I think what's happened in the West is it's been made concrete. It's stultified, right? And that's well, enough said there. Yeah, that there hasn't been a proper understanding of the splitting. The idea of a splitting is huge in the Bible. The Red Sea was split. It's all over the place, the splitting. And there's something, even in the Mosaic law, it was unclean for the Jews to eat animals that split the hoof. So there's this idea in the Bible, there's something sacred about the act of splitting. And that sounds really weird, but trust me, there's something going on with this. And then you might think of the picture that Jordan Peterson posted one time of it wasn't his picture, but of how the Bible is the first hyperlinked text. Have you seen that image? So there's this linkage in the scriptures, and so there's an infinite configuration of linkages. There's just so much going on there that then you can imagine that that's a fertile ground, not to concretize everything and name everything and then have it all named, but for an infinite combination and emergence, which is very much alive. And that would like make the East really happy, right? Because you could put spirit in that and it would have everywhere to go. I don't know if you follow that, because I'm on the edge of my thinking here too, but I think that might be part of what merges the East and the West, is to understand how the word isn't actually concrete as it might seem.
No, I think this is great. I don't know how to respond to it well, but I'll try. So I mean, one of the most inspiring things I got from reading the first paragraph of Gospel of John is the concept of word. And the biggest thing I got is that I think this idea of Jesus as being 100% God and 100% man is a very deep idea, very deep idea. And the word is Jesus. So word is 100% God and 100% man. So it is something that is actually, when it is done right, it captures something eternal. At the same time, it is something that refers to real. So it is doing that in this dynamic way at the same time. So it is concrete at the same time, and it is abstract at the same time. Something, it is capturing something eternal that is always there. And it is this infinitely malleable thing that can handle chaos at the same time. Something like that. I mean, that is what it is trying to do. This is like, in the science version of it, it's what people call, induction of, you're trying to kind of hold all of these data with this one core law. So the law is eternal. At the same time, it is operative of all these things. So that it is living, in the sense that it is actually that process of that is going back and forth between the actual facts and how you come up with this. So it is like the spirit that is moving you from real to the eternal and back, and the eternal transforming the real. I mean, that entire cycle is being just captured in that idea. And it is not just induction, but it is also transformation. So it captures the entire idea of the West, of the concepts as being derived through a process from the concretes and used to transform the concretes. Both are, one is science, the other is technology, which is really the gift of West to the world. So go ahead, Jacob, did you want to comment? Okay. Next up is David, followed by Katie. David.
Yeah, I'm hearing all this stuff and everything, and it makes you think a little bit, but, I sort of have things set down in a value structure myself. And, the way I look at the word, the first part of John clearly says everything about the word, but then I also connect it to the Old Testament and Genesis, where God gives instructions almost immediately and starting in Genesis to take and name everything according to its kind. So everything has a name, and it describes the event, the kind of event that actually exists. So to me, when I'm thinking about words, the thing is, I look at it describing an event. As a matter of fact, sometimes now when I take and see a word, many times you take a word and it has many little words inside of it, prefixes, main word, and a suffix. It may have several of them. So if I can get the center word, okay, I automatically know what the rest means. And so often it doesn't mean exactly what people are using it for. But the thing is, what would be really interesting for me to understand, and I've had a problem with this Dao De Jing or whatever it is stuff, because to me, I find it sort of like revelations somewhere off in somebody's mind somewhere. But it would be interesting to see how, if you take an event, any event, as to how, okay, the West looks at it, also the Eastern religion, and also your Indian religion. How do they take and look at one event and define it? Because it would seem to me there has to be, otherwise you don't have a form of communication. The thing is, there may be the supernatural maybe involved in it to some degree. To me, the supernatural is very much involved in Christianity. I mean, the thing is, but I'm hearing that it also in these other religions as well. And to me, it would be interesting to see, like I say, if you take an event and look at it in these three different ways that people are. Because even Western theology, or whatever you want to call it, Christianity, one thing that I noticed has happened an awful lot is Greeks had their own theology, okay, which is the temple of Apollo and everything that went on there. And the thing is, Homer and his writings, the Odyssey and the Iliad, I mean, that all represents Greek theology in its own right. And the thing is, their form of teaching was always through stories. So you go back into the Hebrew part of it. What is that? It's a story about Abraham, Isaac, about Jacob, and the whole family. And the thing is, within all these stories, it tells events of life that have happened to these people that many people can sometimes associate within their own life, okay, to see what's happened. And the same is true with the New Testament, with Jesus Christ. And the thing is, he openly says he speaks parables, which is stories. I mean, stories are something that everybody can see and appreciate in their own way and gather something out of it. That's why, like what Jacob said, I really agree with what he said, is that, no matter what version you're looking at, it still talks to the person through the stories. The only thing is, myself, I've always been on this, it's been in my mind to take and search exactly what some of these meanings were. Like I went back, and when I first started in the Bible, taking and breaking the covenant down and saying, what does this mean in Hebrew? And I would take in those words and break them down as to what they actually meant in the Hebrew language. Now, that was just something for me. But the thing is, inside of that, there's a story. And the story, all these stories, whether they be in Greek or Hebrew, and I think probably in these other languages, relate to human life and some kind of event that has happened within inside of whoever's talking about it, and whatever's there.
Yeah, no, that's excellent point. I want to make 2 points. I mean, one is that, we have all different faculties, and we have different strengths and different ways in which we approach and grasp things. This is very clear when you look at something like, for example, we are studying this book called Design Way. And it is really amazing to see the approaches people are taking to it. There are some people who are very analytical. They want to get the meaning of everything. There are some people who are very intuitive, so they can take these diagrams and organize them just without words. Visually, they can organize them. There are people who like to work with their hands, so the way they actually master something is by working. There are people who have very advanced feelings about what things are proper or not proper, and they have got this very delicate way of saying, okay, this is off and this is not off. So all of us approach things differently. And one of the advantages of a forum like this is that you can see other people approach things differently and maybe learn something from them. And what happens is that of course, you will continue to exercise the strengths that you have, but adding even 5% or 10% of something else to your toolkit makes, the throughput, what you're able to do, far more richer. Thank you. Next up is going to be Katie, followed by Jacob. Katie.
Yeah, I agreed with Evanique. I often use the concept of the Tao to kind of understand what a creator is. To understand like the concept of a creator, like it's something that you can't 100% know what it would be like. And I see the idea of word more as establishing like correct belief, like this is like the word of God, and rather than like this explains everything. So that's how I.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Next up is Jacob.
Yeah, this gets so deep so quickly, doesn't it? So I think a distinction is necessary. And incidentally, what is the distinction but a splitting? Because oftentimes we have one idea but we could split that, and there's actually two ideas there that have to be distinguished. And so when we're talking about perspectives, for example, I see this happening all over the place. And I love the idea of course, like we want everyone's perspective. We need everyone's perspective. but we want those perspectives to be somewhat complementary, not conflicting, because like in the case of the idea of chapter, well, the first verse in the Dao De Jing and the idea of the word in the Bible, well, can we just say, well, those are just two different perspectives, equally valid, and then we just go on with our day? Well, to me, that's a problem. Like, those either need to be reconciled or one of them has to go. And that's very different than to say that, well, there's different perspectives that can complement one another and that can coexist. But that distinction isn't talked about. Just like, hey, respect everyone's perspective. And that's not enough, right? If they're conflicting, you have to deal with it. You have to deal with it. Unless you live in a world where you think every single perspective and every single thing that's said is equally true. And that's part of the thing Jordan Peterson's railing against, is this equity, and all ideas are all equally valid and things like that. Those ideas destroy the world. So some things are better than others. And if you have a conflict, that's an opportunity to find out which one's better. On that note, last comment, I feel like I've been just like talking your ears off tonight. I appreciate everyone's ears, really. So I'm going to take my hammer to the best hammer throw I can throw at the Dao De Jing. And I do it, just let's see if it stands. It's really simple. And sometimes this feels almost like a cheap shot, but I've carefully thought it through, and I don't think it's a cheap shot.
Go right ahead.
So the Dao De Jing, I have tons of ignorance surrounding the Dao De Jing too, so I might say stupid things and you can fill me in. But it uses words. And if it didn't have words, it wouldn't be communicated, and we wouldn't even be talking about it. Like, we're talking about the Dao using words. So the Dao itself relies upon the word for its propagation. And so in some sense, the word is sire to the Dao. And so that's why I found it like profoundly hypocritical of the Dao, if I could call the Dao hypocritical. And again, I want to be wrong in some sense. It poo-poos the word in a sense and saying that it's somewhat inadequate, like it's useful, but it's inadequate. But then it's using the word to convey that idea. And so I could apply its logic to itself and say, well, how can I trust that verse? Do you know what I'm saying? And I know that's where it feels like a cheap shot a bit, but it also feels valid. Like if you're going to say the word is secondary or second rate in some sense or inadequate, well, then why do you rely on it utterly? That's my hammer, Shrikant.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Now that you have thrown your hammer, let me go ahead and let me give you a short answer to that. It's the difference between the way in which alphabet works and the way in which logograms or pictograms work. What they're doing is that the words there you're talking about are not the words in the alphabet. Words are like little pictures that are capturing things, which actually suggest things. Those are actually metaphorical. They're saying, this is a flowing water. It is, life moves like this. So it is suggestive, metaphorical way of not saying this like this, but it is pointing like that towards that and inviting you to explore relations in nature. So it is really another way of putting it is that Tao is mostly about nature and respecting the nature of nature. That's all it is trying to do. And it is trying to say that if you have culture that conflicts with nature, then go with nature. Go with how people actually are, how relationships between people actually are, instead of using some things that you have created, that you've fallen in love with. So it is really trying to promote nature. The West is more focused on culture, of saying, how do you make things right? And so it is coming, but we live in nature by making culture. So both those things are needed. The Dao De Jing has the nature part much better than the West. It has the spirit much better than the West. But the West has the culture and and the words far, far better. So I think there is relative strengths in each of them and relative weaknesses, but they are not, I don't see them as conflicts. It's when two things are said, it's possible that both are capturing different aspects of reality. And if that is so, then it is not that you either take this or that, but you find what is actually true, which might be a combination of those things. So that's my response to the hammer. It's not not a full response, but let me go ahead and go with Jing, Evanique, and Mike. Jing.
Yeah, I think what I can't remember his name. He's talking about it's quite interesting. I think that was exactly what I was believing before. So I think the Western thinking, we believe there's ultimate truth. Basically, there's something that's true, then the other things are not true. So we are pursuing this ultimate truth. But I see when I study Dao De Jing and Eastern, even I grew up in China, I actually have more Western thinking somehow. And I realized they don't believe that. So they believe, the paradox coexist, so the good and bad. So not good is good, bad is bad, but the good and bad, there exist for balance. So there's this more like uncleared, instead of Western like good or bad, truth or not true. So they're like, they all can combine together. It's more like a vague, organic way of thinking, which I start more accepting. And also listen to Sadhguru too, mention everybody have the good and bad, and it just in the certain environment, it trigger this, you show this, then you actually kind of like, you self-content, both, everything content both factor, yin and yang. So I start accepting that. I think that I can understand what he was talking about, because I think I had that similar thinking before, but I start to change my thinking, and I start to see how the other thinking makes sense too. Because remember, I read a book a long time ago. It's quite shocking because they're talking about a group of people sitting there doing a pencil rendering a figure. And then somebody draw this, somebody draw that. And then they want to see what they really draw, which is truth. Then they step in and there's nothing. So this is another Western philosophy's idea. So there are actually no truth. So which is quite shocking, it's just totally evoked my mind about this believing there's ultimate truth. Maybe there's no ultimate truth. I think I just want to say that's quite interesting, the different thinking method.
Thank you, Jing. Next up is Evanique, followed by Mike. Evanique.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the hammer that Jacob had. And first of all, I want to say I get what you're saying. But I think if we're talking about the Dao De Jing and we say that they use words, I don't think the Dao De Jing is opposed to using words. I think the whole point is that there's so many different words that could describe God or the Dao. So you have the Dao, you have God, you have Allah, you have Jehovah, you have Source, you have Divine Mother, you have gods and goddesses. There's all these different words that are used to describe God, and there's no one word. I think it's what it's trying to say, is that there's no one word to describe God. And when you try to say that there is a word that describes God, you're not describing God, because God is everywhere. God is so many different things to so many different people that it's so hard to describe God. And when we try, we're really not doing that. So that's all I wanted to say. And one more thing, I love Jen's theory of the ultimate truth. Like, is there an ultimate truth? I don't know. I don't think there's one way to worship God and all the other ways are going to hell. I don't believe that. I think there's different ways of worshiping God. And I don't think any of them are wrong or right, but I think it is about the internal. And I think that's where we're going. It's all about the internal, what's going on inside you. And I think that's what different religions in their truest form try to address.
Thank you, Evanik. Mike, we are running out of time, so I'll give you 1 minute.
30 seconds, and this is more a question than an answer. I believe that what Jacob is saying is that there's a difference, that the Bible is divinely inspired. All of the different interpretations were basically written by God through the hands of a scribe. The Tao in particular, I think, is a description of nature and the reality. And if you find something new of reality, it's easy to change. You don't have to go to the original prophets. I think to some extent, the Gita is the same way. And the battle between Arjuna and so forth is not, it recounts history, but it's not quite the same way as being divinely inspired. And that's a stretch on my part. I'm looking for your comment on that.
Thank you.
Maybe I won't get it until after we study that next month.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, you'll have to wait for that. Next up is going to be Kevin. Kevin, go ahead, followed by Jacob. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry about this later response. Jacob, thank you. You should be before me. I'm going to. He mentioned about how combine the Western, Eastern, Indian, Chinese, or other religion or culture together. That's one example in Chinese. Now, in Chinese, normally we think we have no religion. Actually, if you search wiki, Chinese folk religion, you find a lot. And here, the link I post is how the Buddhism, Buddha, Confucius, Laozi taste vinegar, 3 different tastes, talk about vinegar south. So that's also, if you look at Chinese temple, one temple, 3 religion. It's Dao, Zhu, and Zhu is like Confucius, and also Buddhism. So on the same temple. So it's no doubt like this conversation, like how beautiful you guys talk. I just listen very carefully, try to be learning. For me, beginning mind always. Thank you so much. Just save time. Yes.
Thank you, Kevin. And that was a great point. I mean, for example, like the structure of thoughts is different. Like, for example, in China, there is the Tao and there is Confucianism. And both those actually interact with one another very intimately. Like China, you can't really understand without both those things together. Excellent point. Next up is Jacob. Jacob, go ahead.
So I surely don't think that any one word can explain God. That's for sure. And I'm not even familiar with that claim. Are there people who think with a single word he could be explained? I mean, I more think that he can be explained with a bunch of words slowly over eternal time. So that's a whole different idea. Well, here's a verse that's just killer to the idea that God can't be explained with words, because the Bible says that the word explains him. Right? I think we just read that, didn't we? That no one has seen God at any time, but well, I'm confusing translations now, but the one who has explained him, and it's a reference to Christ, the Word. So that's saying, not even implicitly, closer to explicitly, that the Word can explain God. So I don't know why there's this idea that it can't. I think because there's a separation between Christ as the Word and the spoken word, we divorce those two somehow, and they're related. Like the act of speech is directly related to Christ himself, because you might regard him as the spokesperson of God. He's speaking for him. And so he's the word. And it's all about speech in some sense. And so when we're speaking down here and we're in the divine form, we're sons, so to speak, as he was. And when we speak, it's that divine faculty of speech, right? And it's that divine faculty of speech, the word that can explain God. That's the power of speech, that it's so divine that it can explain the divine. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know that's a wonderful point. I mean, I think that's, let me look at like the culture, like for example, Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson always talks about, speak your truth and the importance of that. And that point is lost in the modern culture. That point is lost because the word is regarded as, oh, everybody speaks things. It's just what you feel like. So it is completely off earth. The idea. So I keep coming back to this. I have it in a very vague form. I don't understand it, but there is something really deep about that idea that it is God and man at the same time. You can use words only like a man, and you can use words in another way where it is actually speaking to God, and it can do both. Words can do both, and there is differences in those things. And so in some ways, the point that you were making, Jacob, that in the modern times that the soul is lost, in the sense that people are focused on the external, they're not focused on the internal. They are being man, but they're not being God at the same time. And it's a very profound thing. I mean, the Bible, I'm just discovering it. So the entire pattern of Jesus being 100% God and 100% man, then teaching his disciples how to be like that by showing them that this is what you need to do, starting by washing their feet and transmitting that knowledge further and then to humanity as such. I mean, it is just incredible. And Jacob, thank you very much for your comments today. I think this is a great conversation. I mean, just like, this is a conversation that you would like to have. This is a conversation that I like to have. And it is wonderful to have so many people who can participate in it and contribute to it in such a deep way, raise questions, because, raising of questions is actually more important, because some people will raise a question and that will spawn this entire discussion. So I want to thank everybody. I was planning to start this thing at 8 o'clock so I could finish by 10 o'clock, but I have structured it so that I could spend as much time. And this has been just incredible. So I am just loving this series. And I think the fact that so many of you know the Bible so well and have thought so deeply on it, and bring all of this to the table is fantastic. And I expect that the conversations are just going to keep getting richer and richer, because as we develop common context, ways of speaking, as we go through the book, I think meetup after meetup, it's going to be deeper and deeper. So I am just delighted that you're here. Thank you very much. And I will talk to you folks very soon.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
Suzanne.
Thank you, Shrikant.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.